we're going to have Mr. Steve Wells. Steve has written a chapter in the book called Foundations of Moral Innovation. So, Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anthony. I'd like to start first by echoing Bettina's sentiment of appreciation for being included in this group of authors who are not just great thinkers when it comes to innovation, but practitioners as well. So it's a real privilege for me to be part of this project. About 25 or 30 years ago, according to my memory, there was a discussion in the field of education about the content of education and what should be included in curricula. And one of the big topics of the day was values education. And it was pretty much universally agreed that there should be values education, but very quickly the topic switched to whose values, what values? And that was a much more sticky topic than should values be a part of education. And so it became very clear early on that values, which are a reflection of moral understanding, are not simple, and there's no one agreed on set of universally accepted values. So my motivation in writing this chapter along those lines is to argue for finding the most solid base that we can for values. And why? Because without a solid foundation, which many people can agree on with values, what's seen as moral can shift. We don't want to be in a position of being reactionary to the news of the day. We want to have values that we can agree are sound and that can stand the test of time. We don't want to just be the flavor of the month. Ultimately, if that's where we're at, it's not helpful at all. Ironically, perhaps, I argue based on what are agreed on values or similar values based on the major religions of the world, which I'm sure most of you will agree are one of the most disagreed on topics. But that disagreement tends to be based on the various truth claims made by the religious traditions of the world and not values. Many of the religions of the world have some common values. And so that's what I want to look at. And I want to go to a quote that I have in my essay from C.S. Lewis, which really captures the launching point for what I'm arguing for in this chapter. And it's from C.S. Lewis. And this is what he says. The Hebrew tradition talks of learning to separate the precious from the worthless. St. Augustine describes virtue as ordo amoris, or ordered loves, the wisdom to value things according to their worth. In Hinduism, there's the concept of vrta, or the nature and supernature to which men's good conduct corresponds. The Buddhists talk about the Tao, a reality that is deep and rich beyond words, the greatest thing, preceding even the creator. It's been called nature, or the way, or the road. There are differences between religious and philosophical schools, but what they hold in common is significant. A doctrine of objective values, beliefs, that some conduct is aligned with truth and others with falsehood. In this tradition, from time immemorial, values and emotion are not at odds with reason, but join it in a glorious harmony. Lewis was talking about education and a discussion back in his time about what values should be a part of education. But I think it holds true for the topic of innovation. The religious impulse has been a part of the human experience from before history was recorded. It's always been a part of us. And a lot of the values that I mentioned in the essay are shared values, shared for millennia. Two main areas that I focus on in the essay are the dignity of people and care for nature. And so the essay builds a case for using religious shared values. And then I, after building that case, give examples. And so the article starts with an abbreviated history of what others did and showing the current inflection point that we have in history. And I know a number of you have also pointed out the fact that we are at a time when there's a great sensitivity and awareness of the need for moral innovation, that we consider, just as Bettina was saying, that there could be a dark side, that there can be unanticipated consequences. And what we want to do is try to anticipate those as best we can. There are hard learnings about these unintended consequences. And so there's increasingly, especially among young people, a greater sense of moral responsibility. The question becomes how? How do we approach this? And what I talk about is that there is an individual commitment to moral innovation that people have to have, because it's people that populate organizations, and it's people who influence those organizations. Innovators have the opportunity, since they are, in a sense, the trail guides for the organizations to the future, to lead others and to push more towards ethical outcomes. Doing good for others and stewardship care of the earth are two things that I think are hard to argue with.
Very good. Thank you so much, Steve. One other point, and I really enjoyed the research behind your article and the details from different religious traditions and how they do give us a footing, if you will, as you use the word in your chapter, around certain values. But my question is this. In your chapter, you coined a new word that I think appears for the very first time anywhere in the world in this book, and the word is neolatry. Can you tell us what that word means?
Sure. Neolatry is a word that I coined. That's a portmanteau word, a combination of two other words. Neo, the prefix that means new, and idolatry. And essentially, it's this notion that anything new is good automatically. And so that can be a very powerful drug in the field of innovation. We get so excited about the potential of something that it must be good. And so we end up, as Bettina mentioned, with thousands of versions, most of which are perhaps unnecessary, just because they're new, just because we can. And new is better. And we see that sometimes with people's ideas, that the younger generation thinks that the older generation's ideas are all wet because they have these new thoughts, and they must certainly be right because they're the newest idea. But it's the same thing for innovations, that they don't come under a critical eye because they're new. So new is better.
Yeah. So
New is the most powerful word in marketing.
Indeed. And so in essence, it ends up being the worship of and pursuit of everything new, simply for the sake of new. That makes sense. Yeah, very good. And while we all value innovation and see the role it plays, we understand the limitations there, that we can't simply pursue it for the sake of pursuing it. Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate that. That was excellent.